My wife walked into that Lancaster County courtroom with the 27-year-old real estate agent she had started calling an advisor sitting one seat away from her, and both of them looked at my dead mother's house like it was already sold. Karen wore a cream-colored suit I had never seen before, the kind of outfit a woman buys when she wants strangers to believe she has already won. Tyler Reed sat close enough to be noticed, far enough to pretend there was nothing to notice. He had a narrow navy jacket, polished shoes, and a silver watch he kept adjusting as if time itself worked for him. Beside him sat a quiet attorney with a leather folder on his lap, a man who had not said a word all morning. That told me Tyler had come prepared, or at least prepared enough to think he was safe. I sat on the other side of the aisle with my lawyer, Leonard Hayes, and a yellow envelope under my right hand. The envelope was soft at the edges, worn from months inside a safe deposit box, with my mother's handwriting across the front. Only open if Karen tries to take the house. For most of my life, I believed a man could survive almost anything if he kept his voice steady. That morning, steadiness felt heavier than anger. Karen's lawyer stood first and made the whole thing sound clean. He said marital funds had been used to maintain the farmhouse on Maple Creek Road. He said the property had appreciated dramatically during the marriage. He said my emotional attachment to my mother, Margaret Miller, had clouded my judgment. He said Karen deserved an accounting, reimbursement, and a fair share of any increase in value connected to the home. He used polished words that sounded harmless until they landed. Equitable distribution, marital contribution, temporary injunction, trust accounting. Every phrase felt like a clean shoe stepping across a grave. Karen folded her tissue twice when her attorney mentioned Margaret, as if grief had a shape she could arrange on the table. I had lived with that performance for 12 years. The small tremble in her chin, the pause before a sentence, the lowered voice that made people lean toward her. Then she spoke. Your Honor, Daniel is too attached to the past to make rational decisions about this property. His mother's house is no longer just a house. It is an asset worth millions, and he is hiding behind grief to keep me from what I helped preserve. Leonard did not attack her. He kept his voice level and his eyes on the documents. He wrote one word on his legal pad, then capped his pen. Wait. I pressed my thumb against the sealed edge of the envelope and did exactly that. Karen continued. She said she had cooked for Margaret. She said she had visited her. She said she had watched me pour time and money into that old place while our marriage slowly died in the background. She said I cared more about rotten porch boards and faded family photographs than about building a future with her. Tyler adjusted his watch and looked down, hiding the little smile that pulled at his mouth. That small movement told me everything. He was not in court because he loved Karen. He was there because he thought the deal of his life was about to close. When it was our turn, Leonard rose and buttoned his jacket. He asked the court for permission to present the trust instrument, the recorded deed, bank records, communications related to Keystone Urban Holdings Limited Liability Company, and acquisition materials connected to Tyler Reed. Tyler's fingers stopped on the edge of his watch. Karen folded the tissue again, tighter this time. Then Leonard nodded to me. I lifted the yellow envelope. It felt impossibly light for something that carried my mother's final act of protection. Your Honor, Leonard said, before the court decides whether this property can be treated as part of the marital dispute, we ask that Margaret Miller's final statement of intent be considered alongside the trust records. Karen's lawyer objected before he knew what was inside. Leonard expected that. He calmly explained that the letter was not being offered as the sole proof of misconduct. The legal foundation rested on the trust documents, the deed records, the banking evidence, and the acquisition materials. The letter explained why Margaret structured the trust the way she did. The judge took the envelope and looked at my mother's handwriting. The room seemed to shrink around that yellow paper. Karen finally looked afraid. Not sorry. Not ashamed. Afraid. There is a difference, and after 12 years of marriage, I knew it well. Everyone in that courtroom thought we had gathered to argue about money. Karen thought she was claiming a share of a house. Tyler thought he was standing beside a future prophet. But my mother had understood something none of them did. A house can look quiet from the road while holding every truth a family ever tried to bury. The farmhouse on Maple Creek Road had never looked impressive to people who measured life in square footage, granite countertops, and gated driveways. It sat outside the busier part of Lancaster County, where summer fields opened wide and fall carried the smell of damp soil, wood smoke, and apples dropping soft into grass. The porch wrapped halfway around the front. My father replaced those boards by hand when I was a boy, sweating through old work shirts while my mother brought him iced tea in a glass jar. Behind the house stood a small apple orchard, 20 old trees leaning in different directions like tired men after a long shift. A red barn sat near the back line of the property, its doors stubborn, its roof patched with tin that never quite matched. To Karen, it was an old wooden box my mother refused to leave. To Margaret, it was the last honest thing my father left behind. To me, it was where I learned that work could be a language. My father taught me to hold a hammer there. My mother taught me to hold my tongue there. Those two lessons shaped my life, though one of them took much longer to understand. When Karen and I first married, she pretended to like the place. She stood in the kitchen while Margaret rolled pie crust and said the house had character. Later, in the truck, character became dust, old wiring, uneven floors, and that smell old houses get when they refuse to become modern. I did not take offense then. Marriage teaches a man to translate. I told myself Karen simply meant the place needed work. I told myself not everyone loved the past just because I did. For years, the farmhouse was valuable, but not spectacular. Maybe $750,000 on a good appraisal. More than my parents ever imagined. Less than a developer would chase across a parking lot. Then the town announced the Maple Creek Station redevelopment project. At first, it sounded like ordinary civic language. A commuter rail improvement. A new access road. Mixed-use zoning discussions. Small offices. Apartments. Cafes. A boutique hotel. Walking paths connecting the station to the old commercial strip. Then survey trucks started appearing near intersections where nobody used to stop except school buses and farm pickups. Men in clean boots came to public meetings. Older landowners began receiving quiet phone calls. Parcels that had slept for generations suddenly became strategic frontage. I hated that phrase the first time I heard it. Strategic frontage. As if the place where Margaret planted marigolds had stopped being land and become leverage. The farmhouse sat on nearly 4 acres near the proposed entrance road. Not directly in the first phase, but close enough to make hungry people circle. Before the project, the house was family property. After the project, brokers started whispering numbers. $3 million. $4 million. $6 million if assembled with the parcels beside it. I remember the day Karen understood. We were standing at Margaret's kitchen table with a town planning map spread beneath a bowl of peaches. Margaret had gone to make coffee. Karen leaned over the map, tracing the colored blocks with one manicured finger. "This is the corner parcel," she said. I turned to her because that was not a phrase she used. "Not back then." "Where did you hear that?" I asked. She smiled too quickly. "Everyone is talking about it." After that, her attitude changed. She stopped complaining about the farmhouse smell. She started asking about the deed, the taxes, the roof repairs, the electrical upgrade, whether Margaret had a will, whether the land was in her name alone. Those questions came wrapped in concern, but concern has a sound and greed has another. A husband hears both, even when he does not want to admit it. Margaret heard them too. She never accused Karen directly. She belonged to a generation that did not announce suspicion. She noticed who stayed to wash dishes, who looked at family photographs, who looked at filing cabinets. Karen looked at the cabinets. By then our marriage had already begun to lean. Not collapse, not yet, just lean, the way an old fence post leans for years before one storm finally tells the truth. Karen wanted a life that photographed well. Rooftop dinners in Philadelphia. Weekends in Miami. Friends who used summer as a verb. She wanted a car that did not smell like sawdust, coffee, and old receipts from lumber yards. I drove a 10-year-old pickup because it started every morning and because a truck with scratches tells the truth about where it has been. That embarrassed her. I owned a restoration contracting business. At least that was the part people saw. I repaired historic homes, old brick storefronts, farmhouses with sagging beams, and churches whose stained glass had outlived the people who paid for it. Karen used to call that noble. Later, she called it small. She would stand in our kitchen in one of her silk blouses, scrolling through photographs of women she followed online, and say, "You restore houses for rich people, Daniel. But you still live like someone waiting to be invited inside." She always said it gently. That was her gift. She could cut you without changing her tone. If I defended myself, she sighed like I was proving her point. If I stayed quiet, She treated my silence like a confession. She started calling me sentimental, then stubborn, then emotionally limited. That was the word she used when she wanted to hurt me without sounding cruel. Limited. My work was limited. My dreams were limited. My attachment to Margaret was limited thinking. At dinners with people she wanted to impress, she turned me into a harmless joke. Daniel still thinks a good Saturday is fixing a porch rail, she would say, and everyone would laugh because she made it sound charming. I laughed too, because a man can become very skilled at helping people misunderstand him. Margaret saw through that. One Sunday after Karen left early, claiming a headache, Margaret set a plate of sliced apples in front of me and said, "A woman who is ashamed of your roots will not protect your branches." I told her Karen was just tired. Margaret looked toward the orchard. "Maybe," she said, "but tired people rest. Hungry people count." I did not ask what she meant. I already knew. Around that time, Karen began going to community meetings without me. She said she wanted to understand the redevelopment project so she could help Margaret avoid being taken advantage of. I wanted to believe that. Belief is the last charity love gives before it dies. Tyler Reed entered our lives wearing a smile that looked expensive and shoes too clean for a man who claimed to walk properties. I first saw him at a Maple Creek Station public meeting held in the high school auditorium. He stood near the back, shaking hands with older landowners, speaking with the easy confidence of someone who had learned that numbers can make greed sound professional. He was young, smooth, and hungry, with a navy suit cut too tight and a voice that made every sentence sound like a private tip. He used words that impressed people who were worried about losing something they did not fully understand. Zoning overlay, parcel, developer interest, highest and best use, assemblage, access corridor. Tyler knew enough real estate language to impress anxious landowners, but not enough law to understand what an irrevocable trust could do to him. That was his weakness, though none of us could see the full shape of it yet. He found Karen near the display boards after the meeting. I watched him point at a map, then at a road, then at Margaret's parcel. Karen laughed at something he said, a light laugh, younger than the one she used at home. That laugh stayed with me, not because laughter is betrayal, but because every husband knows when his wife is laughing for someone else. Later, Karen told me Tyler was just a broker with useful information. "You should talk to him," she said. "He understands what that land could become." I said Margaret's land did not need to become anything. Karen studied me the way a person looks at a locked door that should have opened. After that, Tyler appeared in small ways. A business card on our kitchen counter, a folder in Karen's tote bag, a message lighting her phone while she turned the screen face down. At first, I told myself I was being old-fashioned, maybe jealous of a young man with rented confidence and clean shoes. Then I saw the way Karen changed after speaking with him. She came home energized, sharp, impatient with ordinary things. The life we had built looked smaller each time she returned from wherever she had been. One evening, I came in through the garage and found her standing in the dark dining room, speaking into her phone in a low voice. "Daniel will not sell because he thinks grief is a business plan," she said. A pause. Then her voice softened. "No, Tyler, I know. If the court recognizes the increase, he will have to make a move." I stood with my keys in my hand and felt the old quiet settle over me. The kind of quiet that does not mean peace. It means the mind is taking photographs. Not long after that, I saw them in the parking lot behind a cafe near Liddy's. Nothing dramatic. No scene that would make strangers stop walking. Just Tyler leaning against his car, Karen standing close, his hand briefly touching her elbow, her smile drifting toward him in a way it had not drifted toward me in years. I drove past without stopping. People imagine betrayal as a lightning strike. Sometimes it is a parking lot you keep driving past, a conversation you pretend not to hear, a truth you place on a shelf because you do not yet have enough strength to lift it. Tyler's real seduction was not his age. It was the future he sold her. He told Karen the farmhouse was not memory. It was access. And access, he wrote later, is worth millions. He formed Keystone Urban Holdings Limited Liability Company with a registered address that led to a mailbox service. He drafted a letter of intent to purchase the property at $1,400,000. That number sounded large to someone thinking emotionally, and small to someone who understood the redevelopment map. Their plan was cleaner than theft and colder than an affair. Karen would file for divorce. She would claim marital funds increased the value of the farmhouse. She would request an injunction and accounting. Pressure would build. I would look emotional, unstable, too attached to Margaret. Then Keystone would position itself as the helpful buyer once settlement pressure forced movement. Tyler would flip the parcel or sell the contract rights to a larger developer. Karen would walk away with money and a man young enough to make her feel like she had outrun her choices. They thought I was slow because I was quiet. That is a mistake people make when they confuse noise with intelligence. Margaret never did. Margaret Miller had hands that always seemed to be doing something useful. Folding towels, peeling apples, writing checks in perfect cursive, tying twine around tomato plants. She was 71 when the redevelopment talk began, small but straight-backed, with silver hair pinned behind one ear and eyes that missed almost nothing. After my father died, people expected her to sell the farmhouse and move into a tidy senior community with vinyl siding, clean sidewalks, and a calendar of activities taped by the mailboxes. She refused. Your father did not work 3 jobs, so I could trade porch light for hallway light, she told me. That was Margaret. She could build a sermon out of one sentence. She never named Karen's betrayal directly. She started with careful questions. Was Karen happy? Did Karen talk about Tyler often? Had I noticed missing documents? I told her not to worry. She gave me the look mothers save for sons still trying to protect a lie because it used to be love. One afternoon, she called me over to fix a loose step. I found her sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, a folder of tax records, and a cup of tea gone cold. Daniel, she said, I want you to understand something. A person can smile at your table and still be measuring the silver. I set my toolbox down. Mom. No, she said, not unkindly. You listen now. I am old enough to know the difference between a visitor and a vulture. That was the closest she came to saying what she knew. Later, I learned she had heard Karen on the side porch during one of those visits Karen claimed were acts of devotion. The kitchen window had been cracked open. Karen was on the phone, probably with Tyler, speaking in the soft voice she used when she thought nobody important was listening. Once she is gone, that house is my way out. Margaret did not slam a door. She did not call me crying. She made an appointment with Harold Whitcomb, an attorney in downtown Lancaster who had handled my father's estate years earlier. She brought tax records, medical records, property documents, and a handwritten list of instructions. She also asked her doctor for a capacity letter, because she knew someone like Karen would someday say she had been confused, manipulated, too old to know what she was signing. Margaret believed in kindness, but she never confused kindness with leaving the gate open. 18 months before she died, she created the Miller Family Preservation Trust, an irrevocable family trust. The deed transferring the farmhouse into the trust was notarized, recorded, and filed properly. I was named sole trustee, but not personal owner. The distinction mattered. As trustee, I had duties. I could maintain, protect, lease, and preserve the property, but I could not treat it like a private wallet. The trust included a restriction against sale to commercial developers for a fixed term, tied to preservation goals and family use. It also stated that if the property ever generated income through lawful leasing or preservation-based use, part of the proceeds would fund a scholarship in my parents' names for local trade students, the kind of kids my father always said America forgot until the pipes burst. Margaret barely told me. She said only, I fixed some paperwork so grief does not make you stupid. I tried to argue. She tapped the table once. Let your old mother do one thing without turning it into a committee meeting. Then she smiled, but the tiredness around her mouth told me the effort had cost her. A month before she passed, she gave Harold Whitcomb a sealed yellow envelope. On the front, in her careful handwriting, she wrote, Only open if Karen tries to take the house. Harold later told me Margaret sat in his office for several minutes after signing the final papers, looking out at the courthouse roof across the street. She said she hoped the letter would never be needed, he told me. But she said hope was not a plan. That sounded like her. Margaret died on a wet Thursday morning in April, with rain streaking the hospital window and my hand wrapped around hers. She did not make a speech. Life rarely gives people the timing movies promise. She only squeezed my fingers once when I said, I am here. Then she was gone. Losing a mother does not feel like one door closing. It feels like the whole house forgets where the doors are. The funeral was held at a small church off a Tulane road, the same church where my parents had married. Neighbors brought casseroles. Old men who had known my father stood near the back with their hats in their hands. Karen wore black and received condolences like she was hosting something delicate. Tyler did not attend, but his shadow did. Karen checked her phone 3 times during the lunch after burial. I noticed because grief sharpens some senses and destroys others. 3 days after the funeral, I found Karen at the kitchen island with a spreadsheet open on her laptop. The heading read Maple Creek Asset Timeline. I stared at it longer than I should have. She closed the laptop slowly, not guilty, just irritated that I had interrupted. "We need to talk about financial reality," she said. Financial reality. Margaret was not even a week in the ground. I still had her grocery list folded in my wallet. "Not now," I said. "Yes, now," Karen replied. "You cannot let emotion drive every adult decision." She explained it like she was helping me. Taxes, maintenance, market timing, opportunity cost. She said the farmhouse had become too valuable to leave sitting under apple trees and sentiment. When I told her the house was not mine to sell, she gave me that soft, pitying smile. "Your mother left you memories, Daniel. I am trying to make sure she did not leave us a liability." That sentence did not break my heart. That had already happened. It clarified the pieces. Within weeks, Karen filed for divorce. Not with sorrow, with strategy. Her petition asked for equitable distribution and requested a temporary injunction preventing any transfer or material change involving the farmhouse, even though she knew I was not the personal owner. Her lawyer demanded trust accounting. He claimed marital funds had been used for improvements. He sought reimbursement and argued that the appreciation during the marriage should be considered. On paper, it sounded serious. In real life, it was theater built on selective receipts. Karen had saved every minor expense connected to the property. Paint, landscaping, a refrigerator we bought after Margaret's old one quit. She left out the major repairs Margaret paid from her own account or from trust reserves. Roof reinforcement, electrical work, drainage correction, legal fees, recording costs. That is how lies often work. They do not invent a new world. They crop the picture. Around the same time, Tyler's Keystone Urban Holdings Limited Liability Company began circulating feelers through a broker network. A letter of intent appeared, offering to purchase the farmhouse at a price low enough to make a developer grin and high enough to sound impressive in court. Karen acted surprised when I mentioned Keystone. She widened her eyes. "I do not know every company Tyler talks to," she said. It was the first time she said his name before I did. That night, after she left for what she called a consultation, I sat alone in the living room with the television dark and the house too quiet. The screenshots did not fall out of the sky. Karen had left an old tablet in the drawer of the side table, a device we once used for calendars, family photographs, and household accounts. It still synced to the shared home account we had never fully disconnected. I did not hack anything. I did not break into her phone. I opened a drawer looking for a charger, and the screen lit with a notification that should not have been there. Then another. Then a synced image preview from a message thread she thought had moved off stage. Karen to Tyler. "He will fold. He always does." Tyler to Karen. "Once the injunction hits, pressure will do the rest." Karen to Tyler. I did not waste 12 years to walk away with nothing. I sat very still, not because I was calm, but because something inside me understood that movement could ruin the moment. The old tablet glowed in, my hand like a witness. I photographed the screen with my own phone, then left the tablet untouched until Leonard could preserve what was on it properly. I did not sleep much that night, but by morning my hands were steady. When a man finally sees the board clearly, pain does not disappear. It becomes useful. The first thing I did was call Leonard Hayes. Leonard was not flashy. His office had old carpet, framed degrees, and a coffee machine that sounded like it was losing an argument. He had handled contract disputes for my restoration work and once told me the best lawsuit is the one your opponent builds for you while thinking you are asleep. I brought him everything I had. The divorce filing, Karen's reimbursement claims, the screenshots from the old tablet, which Leonard later had preserved before we used them, copies of checks, the trust documents Margaret had left with Harold. Leonard read in silence, turning pages with a patience that made me less impatient. When he finished, he leaned back and said, "This is not a fight about a house. This is a fight about control." He was right. Then he gave me the instruction that probably saved the case. "Do not confront her," he said. "Not yet." I wanted to. Every husband who discovers betrayal wants one clean moment when truth walks into the room and knocks the lies off the table. Leonard warned me that clean moments can be expensive. We needed to know who controlled Keystone. We needed to know how far Tyler had circulated the acquisition materials. We needed to know whether Karen had tied herself to the pressure campaign in writing. If I reacted too soon, they could delete messages, change their story, warn the broker network, or paint me as an unstable husband lashing out from jealousy. Let them believe you are behind, Leonard said. People write more freely when they think nobody is reading. So I stayed quiet. Not weak. Quiet. There is a difference, though people like Karen rarely notice until it is too late. Over the next several weeks, we built our side carefully. No midnight accusations. No begging Karen to confess. No dramatic speeches in the kitchen. Leonard requested certified copies of the recorded deed. He obtained the trust instrument. Harold Whitcomb provided the capacity letter from Margaret's physician and a timeline of the trust formation. We pulled bank records showing that the largest improvements had been paid by Margaret or from trust reserves after the transfer. We separated minor marital expenses from major capital work. Leonard said, "Let them claim paint. We will show the roof." I thought the screenshots were the whole betrayal. I was wrong. The real proof arrived wearing a company logo. To most people, I was a restoration contractor. I wore work boots, drove a pickup, and spent my days on job sites arguing with plaster, brick, weather, and budgets. That was true, but not the whole truth. Years earlier, after my business grew beyond what I could run with a single crew, I quietly became a silent partner in a preservation investment fund connected to Miller Restoration Group. We specialized in historic properties around Lancaster County, places too old for careless investors and too expensive for sentimental owners to maintain alone. My name was not on the front door. There was a registered agent, an operating manager, and an acquisitions team that reviewed potential deals before I ever saw them. I preferred it that way. Margaret used to say money talks loudest when it has nothing useful to say. I had no interest in being loud. Tyler did not send the farmhouse deal directly to me. He was not that foolish. He sent an acquisition packet through a broker contact, trying to stir interest without revealing too much. The packet included a parcel map, projected zoning upside, estimated assemblage value, photographs of the road frontage, and the letter of intent from Keystone. One of our analysts flagged it because the property fell within our preservation watch list. When the file reached my desk, I looked at the parcel number and felt the room go still. Margaret's house, Tyler's company, Karen's pressure campaign, all of it in one clean packet, formatted like opportunity. That was the moment I understood the betrayal had not happened in a bedroom. It had happened on a spreadsheet. Karen had not simply chosen a younger man. She had joined him in reducing Margaret's life to a margin spread. I printed the packet, placed it in a folder, and drove to Leonard's office without calling first. He read it twice. The second time, he smiled without warmth. "People should be careful," he said, "when they put their greed in writing." We did not use everything at once. That was the hardest part. A man wants to throw the truth the moment he gets it. But court is not a kitchen argument. Timing matters. Foundation matters. Chain of custody matters. Leonard filed responses. He opposed the injunction as overbroad. He agreed to proper trust accounting while denying Karen's characterization of the property. He requested discovery related to Keystone, Tyler's communications, and any third-party purchase discussions. Karen grew more confident because she mistook procedure for weakness. She sent me messages that sounded almost kind. "Daniel, this does not have to get ugly. Daniel, I am only asking for fairness. Daniel, your mother would not want this." That last one nearly made me answer. I typed 6 different replies and deleted all of them. Silence had become my discipline. By the time the hearing arrived, Karen believed she had the sympathetic story. A grieving husband, a valuable house, a wife who had contributed, a mother's trust that looked, to her, like a wall she could paint as suspicious. Tyler believed pressure would force a settlement. He had no idea the packet he circulated had traveled through my own acquisition team. He had no idea my silence was not surrender. It was inventory. The courtroom smelled like paper, old wood, and the faint burnt dust of heating vents. Karen sat straight, hands folded, wearing sorrow like jewelry. Tyler sat beside his quiet attorney, trying to look detached. Leonard arranged our exhibits in careful stacks. Trust instrument, recorded deed, capacity letter, bank records, Keystone documents, communications, acquisition packet, and the yellow envelope. The judge began with Karen's motion. Her attorney argued that even if the trust existed, the court needed to examine whether marital assets had increased the property's value and whether I had used the trust to shield wealth during the breakdown of the marriage. He spoke well. I will give him that. A good lawyer can make a locked door sound suspicious. He described Karen as a devoted wife who had watched me pour time and resources into Margaret's property while neglecting the marriage. Karen lowered her gaze exactly when he mentioned devotion. Then Leonard stood. He did not begin with Tyler. He did not begin with the affair. He began with the deed. The property had been transferred into the Miller Family Preservation Trust 18 months before Margaret's death. The deed had been notarized and recorded. The trust was irrevocable. Daniel Miller served as trustee, not personal owner. Leonard then presented the capacity letter. Margaret Miller had been examined and found competent at the time the trust was created. Harold Whitcomb's affidavit confirmed the meetings, the instructions, and the absence of coercion. Karen's lawyer objected, redirected, reframed. Leonard let him. Then came the bank records. The largest improvements Karen claimed as marital contribution had not come from marital funds. The roof, the electrical system, drainage, structural repairs, legal fees, and filing costs traced back to Margaret's accounts or trust reserves. There were smaller expenses Karen could point to. Yes. Paint. A refrigerator. Some landscaping. Leonard did not deny them. He simply showed their size compared with the claim she was trying to build. The judge made notes. Karen's fingers tightened around the tissue until it wrinkled into a small white rope. Tyler stopped adjusting his watch. Leonard moved next to Keystone Urban Holdings Limited Liability Company. He presented the letter of intent, the undervalued offer, the acquisition packet, the projected resale value, the broker's circulation record, then the communications between Karen and Tyler, not the personal parts. Leonard avoided anything unnecessary. He kept the focus clean. Pressure, injunction, forced movement. Daniel will fold. He always does. The courtroom changed after that. You can feel when a story loses its costume. Karen's attorney asked for a recess. The judge gave him 10 minutes. During that break, Karen did not turn toward me. Tyler leaned toward the attorney seated beside him, a quiet man who had not said a word all morning. The attorney listened, expression flat, then shook his head once. When court resumed, Leonard requested permission to introduce Margaret's letter as a statement of intent regarding the trust's purpose. Karen's lawyer objected again, arguing hearsay, prejudice, emotion. Leonard said the legal foundation did not depend on the letter. The trust documents, deed records, banking evidence, and Keystone materials stood on their own. The letter explained why Margaret structured the trust as she did. The judge allowed a limited reading. He opened the yellow envelope carefully. I watched his eyes move across Margaret's handwriting. For a moment, I was 8 years old again, sitting at her kitchen table, watching her write grocery lists in that same careful hand. The judge read only part of it aloud. Margaret wrote that a home can become valuable in dollars without becoming less sacred in meaning. She wrote that she had seen Karen stop calling the farmhouse a home and start calling it an opportunity. She wrote that she had created the trust not to punish anyone, but to protect what my father had built from panic, greed, and pressure. She wrote, Daniel must not be forced to sell grief by the acre. Karen began to cry then, but not the way she had cried earlier. This was not performance. This was calculation collapsing. Tyler half rose from his seat, panic moving faster than judgment. But the attorney beside him touched his sleeve before he could say more. The judge looked over his glasses and told him to sit down. Real courtrooms rarely end with thunder. They end with rulings, limits, and consequences written in careful language. The judge denied the request to force sale of the farmhouse. He declined to treat the house itself as marital property subject to direct division. He allowed that narrow reimbursement issues, if properly documented, could be addressed separately in the divorce proceedings, but he rejected the broader claim Karen had built around the property's appreciation. He also noted serious concerns regarding Keystone's role and potential self-dealing connected to the attempted acquisition. Tyler stared at the table. Karen stared at nothing. As we gathered our papers, Tyler muttered that I had gotten lucky, that no one could have known where the packet would go. I turned to him then. It was the first time I had looked directly at him all morning. You should have checked who reviewed your acquisition packet, I said. His face changed slowly. First confusion, then recognition, then the pale little fear of a man who realizes the quiet one in the room was never outside the room at all. Karen heard it too. Her attention moved from Tyler to me, and for the first time in years, she saw me without contempt. Not with love. Love was long gone. She saw me with the shocked respect people give a locked door after they break their hand on it. The hearing ended without applause, without shouting, without the kind of justice people imagine when they are angry. It ended with folders closing, chairs sliding back, and Karen standing in the aisle as if the room had moved without her. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was bright and ordinary, the kind of place where vending machines hum beside people whose lives have just split open. Karen caught up with me near the elevator. Tyler had disappeared down the stairs with his attorney, his confidence leaving faster than his shoes could carry him. Karen's heels clicked behind me, uneven now. "Daniel," she said. I stopped, not because I owed her that, but because a man should know when a chapter is closing. Her face had changed. The courtroom polish was gone. Her makeup had softened at the edges. She looked smaller, but not innocent. "Tyler used me," she said. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because even then she reached for the role that required the least responsibility. "He made it sound like we were protecting ourselves. Like you were going to let the house trap us forever." I said nothing. She stepped closer. I was scared. I did not know what our future was anymore. "You shut me out. You and your mother had this whole world I could never get into." There it was again. The old trick. Turn her hunger into my failure. Turn betrayal into loneliness. Turn strategy into fear. For years, that might have worked. I would have searched my memory for the exact moment I could have loved her better. I would have apologized for wounds I did not make. Grief had cured me of that. So had evidence. "Karen," I said, "you did not betray me when you chose him." Her face lifted slightly. She thought I was giving her a softer place to stand. I was not. "You betrayed me when you tried to turn my mother's memory into a closing statement." The words landed between us, plain and final. She reached for my sleeve. I stepped back. Not sharply, just enough. That small distance said what years of marriage had failed to say. We were done. I left her in that hallway with the echo of her own choices. The drive to Maple Creek Road took 35 minutes. I passed the high school where the redevelopment meeting had been held, the cafe where I had seen Tyler touch her arm, and the fields where survey stakes now stood like little flags planted by the future. By the time I reached the farmhouse, late afternoon light had turned the windows gold. The place looked the same from the road, which comforted me more than I expected. The porch still leaned slightly left. The apple trees still needed pruning. The barn door still hung stubborn and crooked. The world had tried to rename it frontage, access, asset, opportunity. But when I unlocked the door, the house answered with the smell of pine floors, old books, and the cinnamon Margaret kept in a tin above the stove. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, not crying exactly, just letting the silence recognize me. On the table, I placed the yellow envelope, the trust copy, and the letter. Then I found an old frame in the hallway closet, the kind Margaret used for family photographs. I set her letter inside it, not the whole thing visible, just the last page where her handwriting curved beneath the final line. "Protect what love built, but do not become bitter guarding it." That was Margaret. Even in warning, she left room for mercy. I walked out to the porch as the sun dropped behind the orchard. For the first time in months, I did not feel like I had won. Winning sounded too small for what had happened. I had kept faith with the dead. I had kept a promise I did not know I was making. Karen had looked at the house and seen money. Tyler had looked at it and seen access. Margaret had looked at it and seen family. And I, after all of it, finally understood that strength is not always taking what you can. Sometimes strength is refusing to sell what should never have had a price. There is an old saying my father liked, one I used to think was just something men said when they did not want to explain themselves. Some things are not for sale, not because they are worthless, but because they are worth too much.